Welcome to Mom's Writers Club. We are so excited to have some special guests with us today. We have Tobie Carter and Ande Pliego, and we're going to let them introduce themselves in just a second. But I want to talk a little bit about what our episode is going to be about. This episode is all about what happens after you sign with your agent, whether it's advising or just getting to know your agent or then going on submission and what that is like, because I know that it can be a little bit shrouded in mystery and we don't talk as much about that. So we're going to try to get into that a little bit today. Tobie, let's start with you. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Tobie. I write contemporary romance and suspense. I live in Texas with my husband and two little girls, and I am just on the cusp of going on submission, hopefully at the beginning of the year.
Tobie recently signed with her agent, so this is a very exciting time for her. Ande, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Ande Pliego, and I write thrillers and fantasy, and I'm currently on set with my YA psychological thriller, which is pitched as Ninth House meets the Inheritance Games.
That sounds fantastic.
And you have an awesome what do you call those things? The mood board, the
Yeah.
Pinterest board.
Oh, thank you.
I was looking at your
Thank
Twitter
you.
profiles. I was like, oh, that's cool. Makes me want to read it.
Thank you. That's good to hear.
Yeah, it looked very cool. Though this is going to be more about being on sub and signing with your agent, we would love to hear just a little bit about what querying was like for you, and then a little bit about signing with your agent. What that experience was like. Whoever would like to go first.
No, querying was great, but it was super exhausting. I mean, with my first books, because they were suspense, I feel like a lot different than what querying felt like when I was querying my romances. I got a ton of attention on my first books because my hooks were good, but I didn't have the writing skills that I needed to back then. And through querying, I was able to, I don't want to say gather little tidbits of what I needed to become a better writer.
That's cool.
And through learning how to query and having my query reviewed by fellow writers and sometimes agents really kind of helped me cultivate those skills and see where I needed to go to. For me, it was good. I tried to stay positive throughout. For the first ones, I did the the little necklace bead jar to kind of track queries and all of that. But I think like I said, it works differently for some people. Some people can stay positive looking at those little glass jars. Some people can't. But I think that's the biggest thing is every time I got a rejection, I was like, okay, wasn't the agent or wasn't the story at that particular time, and I just continued to keep writing and keep getting better.
Fantastic. Ande, what about you?
Actually, a little bit similar to what Tobie was saying, where you learn a lot along the way and kind of keep chipping away at it. At least that's kind of how it was for me too. But I started querying February of last year. I started with a very obscenely long YA novel, which was just 137,000 words, which is not what you're supposed to do for a YA novel at all. And don't be me, research your word count. But so I massively failed at that, didn't get any bites. And over the summer was like, okay, I need to cut basically 45,000 words from this book. So I kind of rewrote it over the whole summer and then went out again in August, I think. And then I started getting bites and then more and more personalized feedback that, if enough agents would comment on similar things like, oh, the beginning was slow, or what was the other thing? The world building was a little much in this chapter, or this or that. If enough of them commented, then I would take that into account and edit the opening chapters and then send the updated version to whoever still had it that hadn't gone back. And the feedback kept getting more and more personalized. I started getting more and more full requests and just kept chipping away at it, honing it as I went along, until it finally landed with an agent in November. Yeah, we clicked, and she has been fantastic. Yeah, so that's kind of how it went.
I love how you're both saying that querying your novel made you a better writer, that you really took that feedback and that made that whole process into an opportunity for growth, because it's also an opportunity for becoming really depressed and bogged down.
Yeah, it's so true. I've heard the advice, don't query until you're 100% sure. But I think the reality is that nobody's ever 100% sure until they get,
Right.
the call or the offer or whatever it might be. And I think everyone learns through that process. When you had your call with your agent, did they set up expectations as to what kind of revisions they wanted you to do and how much revising was what they thought would be involved? I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
When I had the call with my agent, I actually didn't know if it was an offer or an R&R or just a call to chat. So she had sent a super encouraging, kind email, excited about the book, but also outlining things that she wasn't completely in love with, that she just wanted to know if I would be open to talking about revising. So thankfully I had that in mind even before we talked on the call, but she laid everything out really clearly, which I really appreciated, just because, it's always nerve-wracking as an author when you're putting, your words into someone else's hands and going, I hope you like it, So yes, it was clear initially from the beginning with her, and she's been really open and direct. So I had a pretty clear idea from the beginning, like what all she had in mind that could use work and what didn't as much.
Do you feel like you got to have input to that or push back if necessary?
Absolutely. And I think that's something that I think is huge for any author to talk about on a call with an agent or even during sub with an editor, just because it is, you don't want to have any surprises down the line, or it's just a good way to figure out if you can brainstorm together and like how it works when there's something that you're not quite sure about, if you don't quite agree with something. So yeah, we talked about a lot of things. There were some things that maybe some suggestions that I was like, I don't quite see that, but let's talk about why you're saying that, or like why you think that, and kind of get at the underlying problem or like thing to kind of like tweak what's not working there. Like there's definitely times where like one of us will amicably try to persuade the other about something small, and sometimes like we're like, oh, one of us will be like, yeah, I totally see that, like let's go with that. Or sometimes we'll come up with something completely different. Or if there's something that I'm just super attached to this for some reason, then she's great about it and is like, sure, it's your book.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you two have found a good in between, where you can communicate but also hold on to the things you maybe need to. Tobie, what about you?
So my call, I did not know that it was going to be the call. The email was definitely vague, and I understood like once I got on the call why it was like that, because she was very upfront about the things that she was struggling with, and because the nature of my story dealt with a very big trigger warning content kind of thing, but she went above and beyond and had already reached out to editors to see like, hey, this is the story that this author has, and I really, really want to, bring it to you guys, but I know that it's not something that, is kind of widespread. So she took the temperature to see, hey, what would you guys need to kind of take on a project like this? And, they kind of, gave her some information for what they would need. And she brought it to me and she's like, would you be willing to kind of adjust and change on these things? And to me, it was small. I was like, yeah, of course, totally. Why not? Like if any one of the agents that I had fools with or anything like that would have asked that, it would have been a different conversation. But she was very, very clear on the things that she needed to change before she could take me on to represent. For me, it kind of spoke, I'm not sure if the phrase is wonders, but like that she went above and beyond to already reach out and see what needed to be done to it, and took that extra step to ask me if I would change it rather than straight out rejecting because of one thing that she was kind of iffy about.
It's really interesting that she took that extra step before even offering, of actually contacting editors and really kind of making sure, because it sounds like, she had a real connection to the book, but she wanted to make sure she could sell it.
Right.
And wanted to make sure that you guys could take the steps together that she thought, would make it make it sellable.
It was a great conversation, because after that point where I was like, yeah, I don't, that's absolutely a great idea, because it was something I hadn't even thought about. And I could tell just with the suggestion, I could see it already forming in my head how it would make the story even better. I was like, why didn't I think of that originally? You know?
That's a good sign.
So
I love that.
is.
Yeah.
And I felt like that clicked, and the whole kind of conversation morphed, and we got to, she's like, yeah, I absolutely want to offer representation. And I'm like, great, you know? So for me, everything worked out as far as edits wise.
That's fantastic. Okay, so you both signed with your agents, and I think our viewers would love to know what kind of happens after that, because, you know, there's so much excitement about querying and then signing with your agent, and then it's like this swath of unknown.
The curtains come down and nobody sees anything else. Yeah.
So we'd love to hear a little bit about that. Just whatever you feel like sharing, whether it's phone calls or emails or revising or conversation, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. I know people would love to hear more about it.
I waited about 2.5 weeks for her to get through the edit. I mean, it was characters, plot, pacing, kind of the same thing you would get from a beta reader, but obviously a little bit more in depth. I kind of, you know, like had to absorb what I was, you know, seeing and say, okay, these are the things that I agree with. And for me, I need specific detail. I'm not somebody who can give a general, like, hey, check the pacing. And I'm like, okay, the pacing where? You got to give me an idea, because you read the story 1,500 times and you've went through it with beta readers and critique partners. So for me, I had to reach out and say, hey, you know, I just need a little bit more specificity on what exactly within this section. And my agent's super, super good on communication. She was, yep, let's hop on a Zoom tomorrow morning. And we pumped it out. So I got my edit letter, and a document with PDF edits were just short inline comments. And then I got on the call with her to talk through the edits before I started tackling them.
Great. Andy, how about you?
Fun.
Really similar actually to Tobie. I, after the call, like checked in with a few of her clients, and which is very important step I would recommend to authors. Like, it's just important just to hear from other people, just kind of get, you know, character references, and then signed with my agent finally, and then waited like 2 or 3 weeks for an edit letter. It was similarly sectioned out, you know, character or world building, pacing, etc. Mine was like an 8 or 9 page letter, just because it was bless my agent, there's a lot of world building things that needed to be organized and figured out. So that was kind of like the bulk of the edits that I needed to do. So we hopped on a call pretty soon afterwards. She was super thorough with like examples and suggestions, and we basically just chatted through the entire letter. And she's super collaborative, so it was basically just like an entire brainstorming session through all of the things that needed to be hammered out. So once we finished kind of that big call, I had a pretty good idea of everything that needed to happen. So I took a couple months, kind of like ran through those edits best as I could, not worrying about word count or like line edits or that kind of thing. Then once we got like the plot and the story really fleshed out, then we cut a lot still. I'm very much an overwriter, so lots of cutting was needed. So we did that, went back and forth like maybe 3 rounds of edits, and each time getting like smaller and smaller, more detailed, until finally we're both happy with it. And she put together the edit list, and then it went out into the world.
I have had many moments being, you know, since I signed with my agent, and also since I started working with my editor. But it's a similar feeling to what you guys are talking about, where I'm like, you're going through all this stuff. You're like, got this 9-page edit letter. You know, you're working on your book. You're saying we now instead of me. And it would hit me every now and then that I'm like, I'm not paying for this. You know,
right?
Like, they're paying me. You know, and even more so with my editor. Once we sold my book, I was just like, I mean, maybe it sounds dorky, but I'm like, this is the best editor I have ever worked with,
right.
And like my agent was before her, and they're paying me. It's just so freaky. It's so freaky. It's so much fun.
So is there anything that you wish you had known, like looking back, that you wish you had known, like in signing with your agent or doing revisions with your agent? Is there anything you'd kind of wish you'd known going into it or that you would have offered your previous self as advice?
I can't say there's anything that I wish I'd known, because I kind of feel like the information is all out there. Like it's, if you don't know certain things, it's, I don't want to say it's kind of, you've just missed it somehow, because I feel like it is kind of one of those things where it doesn't feel as different to me than I was beforehand, I guess, because it is, we're still in that, weird revision mode where it'd be like, oh, this is my, critique partner giving me stuff that I need to fix before I go out to the next, to go out to agents, but this time it's going to be going out to editors.
Yeah.
So it's, I think just knowing that each step of kind of the publishing process will be very reminiscent of the steps you've already went through. I think that's, it's, that's, I think, what kind of kept me grounded is knowing like, okay, yeah, and I'm going to have another set of revisions and another set of revisions, but it's not going to be anything that I haven't gone through. So when you get an agent and this stuff happens, it's reminding yourself, I've already done this. Like, it's all up here. I just have to, kind of chill out, relax, get back to that point, and then be able to move forward again.
It's so true that it's reminiscent of other parts. Being on sub is so similar to querying because, the book has been sent out and you are just waiting on an email. It's so similar.
I think the thing that I wish I had kind of known more is that there's no such thing as like achieving, your book achieving like perfection, or like there's or like achieving, like once you get to a certain point then it will get an offer, or like, which is like a bummer to hear, but also freeing, because like I think about like querying my monster of a book, and or the version that my betas first read 2 years ago or something like that, and I'm mortified, like I can't believe I showed that to someone, like oh. And but then I think about it and I'm like, you know what, it's okay, like those needed to happen for me to get the book to where it is now. And like I would not have known, well, I should have known about the word count, that's entirely on me, but like other things I would not have known unless I sent it out and I just went for it. And I just feel like there's like at least I felt so much pressure to have my book be perfect, like to go through every craft book or every single thing that I could possibly do to make this book like the most perfect thing it could ever be, so that someone would just snatch it right up. And it's like, that's not really how it works. Like, you need the feedback, you need to be mortified once in a while, it's okay, and you need to find people who understand that and who can help you get the book there with. So just kind of like letting go of that perfection and just knowing, what, like it's a whole long process, and that's okay.
I'm curious if either of you had, and you probably do, like I know I did, had things that were like make or break parts of the book, like things that you would not do. Clearly your agents did not ask you to do those things, but like when you think about it, are there things about your book where you would have been like, not changing that?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. No, like I said, the content warning of my book, when I signed with Taj and we had the talk about what needed to change, it was in the first half of my book leading up to this huge moment, this really big moment that I would not change. There was no way, because the story wouldn't be what it was without it, and without having that visceral moment of seeing this character at like his bottom, where there was no place else he could go. And like we said, for everybody, all writers, all characters, like all of our bottoms, our lows or whatever are completely different. So to see this, we needed to see this character at what his low was and what he was doing. And I would not have changed that. There's no way. It wouldn't have been the same story.
And that's cool that your agent recognized that, like right up front, sounds like, that this is the nugget, the key thing of this book that cannot be, that's like the heart can't be taken out. Can I work with this? That's cool. What about you, Andy?
That's really interesting that Tobie says that, because that's actually really similar to my book too. My book has a lot of content warnings with it as well, and it deals with a lot of mental health things. I wanted to be very honest with a lot of these very dark realities, and so kind of like throughout the whole book, there's potentially triggering things through it, but there's one point where the character reaches rock bottom, and that was one scene where, like, I had multiple people tell me it was very difficult to read, so I already kind of knew that, but I was like, I can't change it, you know, like it like Tobie said, it needs to be there for the character development, for the story, for all of that. And my agent and I talked a lot about how to go about how to write these scenes, and she helped me tone it down, which initially I wasn't sure about.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, when she first sent me the email, that was one thing she said, like, you know, a lot of this was very difficult to read, and I think it's beautiful and it's well done and it needs to be there, but maybe we can figure out a way not to completely go all the way with some of the more graphic things.
Interesting.
Through talking with her, I agreed that like it would help more people be able to read the book, which is what I want for various reasons. Like, I want it to be a book that, you know, can be encouraging to people struggling with these issues. So I was like, well, yeah, I don't want to change the story or what happens, but maybe some of the words and some of the imagery I can not go as graphic with. So
like you can deliver the same, the same, you know,
the same emotion,
same punch, you know, same emotional heft without, you know, maybe in a more, you know, more readable way or something. Yeah.
No, exactly. And there were a couple of scenes that like I would write and I would send to her, and then she would read it and send back comments, and then I'd write it again and then send it. And like, we just went back and forth, just trying to find that sweet spot of not watering anything down, but just being really thoughtful of how we're saying it. So
yeah, just to piggyback on that statement, because one, I feel like we're writing the same story, but you're writing fantasy and I'm writing romance. But yeah, it was that conversation where I had two scenes that kind of had that really emotional, on the page graphic stuff. And it was like, thankfully my agent was like, you can give this to us, but in a different perspective, to where it's not right here. Like, it's right here. It's right here. I can see it. I can feel it, but I'm not living it with, you know, with the character.
I see a small child back there.
There's Moms Writers Club. Hashtag Moms Writers Club.
Yes, pretty much Moms Writers Club. But yeah, it was those conversations about how can we convey this without, I would say, kind of throwing it into your character. Like, it needed to be graphic, but not super graphic.
I can appreciate that, and I can appreciate trying to like maintain what you need for your book and what feels real and right for your book, but also doing it in such a way that more people are able to read it. I think that's a great way to do it.
I think it really draws attention to that those first few weeks that you're working with an agent are really like trust building. You know, it's hopefully you've had a good call and you've worked out things on the call, and your agent has been open with you and you've been open with them. So, you know, so there are some, you know, expectations, but those first few weeks, you know, or that first round of revisions is kind of like, you kind of really see whether they get you and they get your book, and whether you can trust them with like the real heart of your work.
Right.
You know, if my agent had been like, you have to take out all the fucks, I would have been like, can't do it. You know,
you wouldn't have signed with your agent. I feel like as many fucks as you have in your book, she would have been like, no, listen, before I
know. No, she wouldn't even have started. But it would have killed the voice. It would have just like taking out all the swearing would have just killed the voice. Would have. And she like embraced it like a big fuzzy teddy bear. It was just great. And
you should give her a teddy bear with just the word fuck over it. There's your next agent gift. You're welcome.
Yes.
Okay, Andy, back at it. So you've revised your book. You've gotten it to the point that you and your agent are both happy with it. So you're, of course, moving toward sub. And I would love to know, just anything that your agent talked to you about that you feel comfortable sharing, what prep went into that, if they talked to you about editors, publishers, or if they didn't, just what that whole thing was like. And Tobie, if you've dipped into this at all, please feel, I know you're not quite there, but please feel free to share as well.
I'm very thankful for my agent because she's very go-getter and has no chill in the very best way, which is exactly how I am.
Love
So
that.
we're a great team. So we're actually using, so my agent is based in the UK. Back when I signed with her, we decided to use a US co-agent to go out in the States. So we're going out in both territories simultaneously. My main agent in the UK, she came up with the UK list, and then my US co-agent came up with the US list, and they both sent them to me. And so I have no chill. I did look through and research the editors and was super happy with nearly all of their picks. And I had researched a couple of the publishers before, so I suggested a couple of editors that might be a better fit. And thankfully they were both super happy to be like, oh, sure, like we'll submit to that one instead.
Oh, good. That was actually a question that we got. Our authors allowed to, suggest editors to submit to. So I guess the answer for you was yes.
Yes, I think that's actually super important for authors. Yeah. And I would say that's one thing I would say, ask on the call, before you sign with an agent, is how open they are about sub. I think some agents aren't as open about that, and maybe that's just their way of doing things. But for someone who really wants to be involved and wants to know when it's going out, who it's going out to, all the responses, like me, control freak, it's helpful. So it's good to know that ahead of time.
Can I add one little thing in there? Sorry. I do want to mention, just because you mentioned it about the agents and sub, I actually did not want to know the editors my agent was sending it to.
There you go.
I do agree it's a good question to ask, but I knew that I would look them all up and drive myself up the wall thinking about it. So think of if you're getting on that call, think about if that's important to you. I didn't want to know. I wanted to know which publishing houses it was going to, but I didn't care about. I trusted her to figure that out. And not that you didn't trust your agents, but you know what I mean, figure out what matters to you going into it. Okay, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. I just wanted to add that.
Yes. No, I think that's super important. As you kind of know, querying will probably reveal a lot to you about how much you want to know and how much you don't want to know about submissions.
Right.
So I just say if you can have that conversation with an agent before. I think a lot of agents are probably really flexible on this. My agent was if you want to know nothing, you don't have to know anything. But if you want to know everything, that's totally fine too, or any medium. Yeah. And then after my agents waited for kind of a good time to send out the subs. So I know submission is interesting in that there are times that are really good to send out submissions and times that are really not, because editors are just really overworked and have a lot on their plates. So depending on holidays and how busy publishing seems to be at the moment, your agent should kind of have, a pulse on that, or a hand on the pulse, whatever the saying is, for that. And yeah, then it's in their court at that point, and you just wait.
Yeah. Tobie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I actually do. Just kind of piggyback off of what Andy was saying, where it was talking about the times for publishing. So for mine, of course, I got agented in September, right on the cusp of, that Halloween, Thanksgiving, and, I got done my edits, but I still had to have my agent go through those edits. Which takes about 2.5 weeks, depending on how many, obviously, clients your agent has. And because my agent is also an author and a romance author, and that, she has her own deadlines to meet, my deadlines, her other clients' deadlines. So it's also thinking about those things. On the call, we had talked about going out on submission at the beginning of the year. That was kind of the general consensus, hey, this is how long I think it, might take you, because I don't know how fast you are editing yet, that kind of thing, unless you're you've been given an R&R, and that's how you get your agent, but mine wasn't. So I completed my edits and I sent them to my editor, and I was actually thankful now that we're not going to be going out on sub until the beginning of the year. One, because obviously the strike that's going on now, which doesn't benefit me to go out when there's a ton of editors that aren't there and right on the cusp of holiday season. Everybody's already burned out anyways. It also gave me the opportunity, because I do write very quickly, that I had 2 books that could potentially go out on sub, that I've been able to give my agent time to go through that other one to see which one's stronger to go out with, which one's going to be our best foot forward. So it's kind of also a good thing for me in that sense, that we're going to be waiting, even though like that person in me is just like kind of like a control freak. I'm the same way. I'm constantly like, okay, are you sure? Like, can we go out on sub, if I get it done by this time? And it's like, no, just chill, relax. Like, it's going to go out on sub when it's supposed to. It's going to hit the right editor at the right time, regardless. Like, you're going to end up where you're supposed to be, But my agent, like I said, had already kind of reached out to some editors. So I already had kind of a list of, hey, this is who I'm thinking it might be good with. I want you to pair your list, go through, see what you might want, and then we'll kind of converge and say, hey, maybe we have 2 different people at, the same house, and then we can talk about why we each think one might be better than the other, and figure out, who's going to be the best one to submit to.
You guys were way more involved in that process than I was.
Me too, obviously.
I was just like,
that's great, though.
She sent me the list, and I kept the list, and I changed their colors if we got responses back.
Yeah.
And I did not, and the lovely thing was my agent would send me back their replies, and she would like cut certain pieces.
Redact.
So she would send me back the nice stuff. And then when somebody had like a negative response, she would like annotate the response herself, basically being like, this is a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah.
This is what they said, but it's so ridiculous because blah, blah, blah. So
I also think it's that you 2 have very, very seasoned agents as well. I don't know much about your agent, but I know that mine is newer, but they also have their foot in the same genre that I write. So they have their own connections with different editors as well. So that was a big thing that I don't know if I had mentioned it when we were talking about questions to ask agents, but if you have an agent who does write as well, but also in your genre, to make sure that, how that relationship's going to kind of develop with editors that they may be subbing their own materials to, or
you want to make sure you're not competing with your agent.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was actually the next question I was going to ask you, Tobie. I have heard that it's a thing to consider, and it's not a good thing or a bad thing, but how do you feel about your agent also being an author, or do you have feelings at all about it? It sounds like in your case, it potentially is actually beneficial.
Right. For me, that was definitely a question that I asked on the call to make sure of, because like you said, anything could happen, relationships could sour. You don't know, and it's something you have to be prepared for when you do have an agent that is also an author, and especially in the same genre. But my agent and I, we write different types of romance, different tropes, different everything. So while we might kind of have the same pool, the things that are speaking to those same editors are way different. So I think that was the biggest thing. And obviously I try to be mindful of her deadlines with her own, and she's very communicative, like, hey, I have this, that I have going on from my book, so it might take me an extra week to do something for you, or an extra day, or hey, if you can't get a hold of me because whatever, I have a book tour, or I have something that I'm doing. She's communicative about what she has going on with her own stuff, so that I can kind of set my expectations. And if there's something that I have that I'm struggling with, I completely feel comfortable saying, hey, like, can we hop on a call? I'm having trouble with this, or I'm having anxiety about this. And like she said, with submissions, you see all these other people getting deals, and you're like, man, let's go. And she's like, the one thing she always reminded me was, keep your eyes on your own paper. Like,
yes.
When it comes to your deal, those other authors might not have the same backlist that you have, and be selling, they might sell one book for whatever, and you're selling 2 books, 3 books, because you spent the time to.
Yeah.
hone
Yeah.
what you had. Sorry, I know it
Right.
went kind of off on a tangent
No,
there,
no,
but
that's actually our
yeah.
next question. I would love to hear from both of you how you deal with the excitement and anxiety of now being agented and being on sub. Like, how do you deal with it? And do you have advice for others?
I don't deal with it. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's hard, but also like I think it's easy when you're in the middle of sub, especially like when it's been a little bit of time, and especially that beginning where you're like, the day it goes out in sub, you're like, I just know I'm gonna hear something, ASAP. And then maybe you don't for a while, and that's okay. And it's easy to get kind of like super stressed and be overthinking everything and this and that. And I think one thing that is really easy to forget is just how exciting it is, and like how exciting it's like you've reached this point and someone loves your book, an agent, an industry professional loves your book and is sending it out. Other industry professionals are reading it, and like that's really exciting, even just that. So it's kind of like, just remind yourself, take the wins where you can get them. That's already a win. That's huge. What I've been trying to do is just really work hard on the next thing and just keep going with that and keep busy. Yeah, kind of like make plans regardless of whether you sell that book or not, so that you know what's coming next. And then you're pleasantly surprised if something better comes along, or something changes. But just kind of like always keep kind of like looking forward, and with what you can control and what you can't do.
Right. That's sort of the ultimate eyes on your own paper, is to be writing your next book, because nobody else can write your next book. Only you can do it.
Yeah. Tobie, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, tons. None of it probably helpful. No, but yeah, I kind of feel like the same way, like you say, keep your eyes on your own paper, but also with the whole process, kind of giving yourself some grace and space. Like we said, even when we were querying, when it comes to submission, selling books, there's that thing like, you're like, oh, congratulations to all the people that are getting books. And then you get that, like, why not me? Like, why isn't that me? And I think it's worth it to be able to kind of like, I'm a positive person. I always try and look at the positive side of things, and I think that helps me a lot. But it's not like I don't see all this stuff happening around me and start to get that jealousy. And it's like, no, not your time, and even if I want to say, kind of recognize when you need to take a step back from things. Of course, we have so many social medias out there, and it's constantly in our face, the winnings and the everything else that everybody's doing that we aren't there yet, or we haven't gotten yet. And I think you have to know when you need to take a step back and just to kind of recalibrate and refocus. And for me, like, that just happened recently. I loved Discord, but I had to take a step back, and I'm like, you know what, let's just refocus, because what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? Because I love to write. It's I love to write. These people love to write. So just get back into your writing. Find a new story. Like you said, start working on your new story. For me, like I said, I'm very communicative with my agent. She probably is just like, oh my gosh, Tobie's messaging me again with some crazy story or something like that. And she'll send me plot bunnies like, hey, this sounds like something you would write, type of thing.
Aww.
And I just this morning, I had a call with her where we were talking about, since I, write 2 different genres, like, hey, this is what we're thinking about for your suspense stuff. Like, what do we want to do there? And it's always kind of having something to look forward to while you're waiting. So just move on to the next thing and let the stuff behind you kind of roll on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, for me, working on the next thing is really helpful. That was the case like during querying, but also definitely like with being on sub, having the next book to be excited about was really helpful. And then I also went into sub expecting, I heard someone else say this and I thought it was so good, expecting not to hear anything for like 6 or 8 weeks. And of course I did, but I went into it with that expectation. So like at a week when I hadn't heard anything, that was, that was okay. And then Tobie, I also loved what you had to say about like having something to look forward to. For me, at times it has been the writing retreats that I've done with Sarah. And just knowing that, you know, you get to go do some fun thing. And it could be anything. It could be a vacation, or it could just be, I don't know. I don't know what else it could be, because for me, I think of vacation or writing your retreat.
Right.
I also found that focusing a little bit on trying to improve my craft always kind of got me out of my own head. So for me, that's been reading craft books. Sarah, do you have anything to add?
I have to constantly remind myself that other people's success does not mean that there is less success available for me. And I have to say that out loud on a regular basis, to hear myself say something so totally ridiculous, you know, that I would even have that idea. But I do. I do. Right. You know, like somebody, and it just keeps going. You know, somebody else's debut comes out a few months before mine, and it gets picked for something or some list or some book club or something like that. And, you know, and I have that moment of like, what about me? Right. You know, but then it's like that person's success, like, has no bearing on how much is available to me or you or anybody. So I have to keep remembering
absolutely.
That. I'd even say the same thing with kind of story. I mean, my book features a funeral home, and like there were like 6 people querying, you know, funeral home romances, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, is everybody going to be funeral homed out by the time they get to mine? And I had at least 2 agents pass. They're like, I already have, you know, I just took on a funeral home romance. I'm like,
it's so weird.
You know? But it's weird. Like reminding yourself that, one, those writers they don't have your voice. They're not writing your story with the same setting, with the same, you know, whatever, the same tropes and all of that. So it's like, just remember, hey, mine is steamy in this, yours is a rom-com. They're 2 different stories meant for 2 different people, and there's space for all of us.
Okay, so those are all of our questions on like signing with an agent and working with them, and then going into subs. So we have a few more minutes here. So let's talk. We got a lot of questions about querying, which I want to remind viewers, we have like 2 or 3 episodes specifically on like questions to ask on the call, how to do a query letter, how to approach querying. So take a look on our channel for those if that's what you're kind of hoping for. But one question we got is, did you have to pivot during the query process? Change your query letter, your opening scenes? You know, did you make any changes that you feel affected you getting your agent?
I'd say with this specific story, I did not have to change my first chapters. They were kind of spot on. It was the kind of gunky middle stuff and ending that I had to work around, but I did change my query. Course, multiple times, just trying to get the stakes right. And that was always the biggest thing for me, even now when I'm writing, you know, any kind of proposal or a thing like that, or saying like I have to write something for my agent and say, hey, this is what I'm working on. Getting those stakes right is,
and they're so important.
The hardest.
That's
and why do they have to be so important? I mean,
I know.
I'm just kidding, but it is the biggest thing. It's like, you know, you can know the characters, you can kind of know the plot, but you really have to drive home those stakes so that we know what the characters, you know, we're kind of up
why
against.
Does it matter?
Yes. And I think that's the biggest part of your first pages, is making sure that you kind of get the idea of where your character is at, what's going wrong for them, or what they're looking to attain, and kind of driving that home.
Ande, what about you?
Well, aside from like the major rewriting overhaul that I did after that, when I sent it out, definitely got more bites and, like, again, more personalized feedback. So the main thing, which, good on you, Tobie, for having like a solid beginning. Beginnings are the hardest for me. Like, my goodness, so hard. So I rewrote that first chapter, the first couple of chapters, so many times, and ended up cutting a whole first chapter after several agents were like, you know, like, this is like, I just was not drawn in. So I was like, we looked at it, cut a whole first chapter, started it in a different place, and then reworked that second chapter so many times, like with betas and CPs, and then sent it out again. And then I would get even more feedback. It just wasn't quite still drawing me in. So I went back to it, like worked on it again. And if it had been a few weeks between when I had sent out the latest batch of queries, then I would only do this one time, take like the most updated chapter and then send it out again and say like, hey, like, not sure if you've seen this query yet, but I've taken some, input from agents and I reworked the opening pages. If you'd like to see it, here it is. You don't really hurt it doesn't hurt to just see. So I was constantly like reworking it, tweaking it, probably more than I should, but I just felt like I was getting like closer and closer and closer, like little by little, until finally it connected with an agent. I feel like you can start to tell when you're close, when you're getting more and more personalized feedback and more like, I really loved this, or I thought this was fascinating, but this, and
it's so true.
Yeah.
And that kind of addresses a question that came in that we see a lot. And that is like, what should my response rate be? Like how many, what should the rate of full requests that I'm getting be? And I struggle with that question because nobody knows. Like nobody knows what the rate, what the number is. Is it 1 in 4? Is it 1 in 10? But it's what you just said was really on point. It's like, are you getting closer? If you're getting requests at all, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
And then, like you're saying in your case, like you could tweak something, you could change something, and then maybe you get a couple more requests and maybe you get personalized feedback, right? So you can see that you're moving the needle. I think it's way more productive to kind of look at it like that than to be like, am I getting a 20%, request rate or something? What I'm also hearing from both of you, which is great, is like to not be too precious about stuff, like to not think that your thing is totally perfect and like it has to be published word for word just exactly the way it is right now, or you'll just
faint.
So yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of give and
absolutely.
take and craft work that is still going to happen even after you sign.
Yeah, I've heard many agents say that they don't expect the book to be perfect, which I think is a good thing to hear, But I wanted to add to the thing about the request rate. I have seen many YouTube videos that say things like, oh, you should be getting at least a 30 or 40% request rate. I think it varies.
Never got that ever.
Well, no, and neither did I. I think if you counted everything, including like the request I got after I got my first offer, it was like maybe 20 or 25%, but that wasn't like average throughout. And I know people who only got one request after sending out 100 queries, and then they signed with an agent and got a book deal. That was a good deal. So, and the other thing is, I think that a lot of the numbers that are thrown around are old numbers when there are not as many authors querying, and when querying was not as busy as it is now. I have heard things like, you should be getting 30 or 40%. I do not know anybody in the last 5 years who has gotten that percentage. So if anybody out there is stressing out about that, please know that like most people who are agented did not get that request rate. You do not need it, and don't worry about it.
There's no magic number. There's just there is no magic number.
I will say, if you've sent out 50 queries and have gotten no requests, then yes, reevaluate your pages, your query, but please don't stress too much about it.
Yeah, I definitely say it's more for me more detrimental to think about it in the way of request rate, where it's like, oh yeah, I'm like, oh crap, I've sent this many queries and this many people haven't gotten back, and it's like that, it's not fair to do that to yourself, because you don't know what's going on the agent side of things. You don't know if they have a ton of authors that just sent them stuff, because they could honestly 100% be excited but have not gotten to your query yet. So for me, I think it's more detrimental for people to look at it that way, rather than to be like, you know what, I'm getting responses from these agents. If they give you feedback, great. If not, then you just haven't hit those agents that are ready to fall in love with your story yet.
Right. Like focus on what you can control.
Okay, we have one last question, and I actually feel like it's a great question to kind of end on. Was there a time during the querying process that you wanted to quit, and what kept you going?
Yes, there were definitely quite a few times when I wanted to quit. Getting 0 requests that first round for my monster of a book was one. Realizing how much work I needed to do on it to get it to where maybe someone would want to read it was a big one. I feel like it would have been very easy to just say like, this is so much work. I've rewritten this book already this many times. I've edited it this many times. it's never going to sell, you know? And I really wanted to quit at that point, but I think sheer stubbornness spurred me on to keep just trying and really trying to see. I feel like throughout the whole process, like whenever you get a rejection, it stings, and some sting more than others. And like it's very easy to get a bunch, or like maybe you get 3 in one day, or you know, something like that. And this goes for submission too, I feel like. And it's easy to just be like so downtrodden by that, you know, that it's easy to just want to quit and give up. But like looking back at like how much you've already accomplished, and like, you know, let's say you've put 2 years of work into this book, you did that for a reason, you know, and it's not just a passing fancy or something like that. And like kind of going back to like, okay, like, well, why have I spent so much time on this? Why do I love this? Why do I feel like this story needs to be told? Has really like helped, like, for me go back to, you know, finding that passion again and going like, I can keep going, I can keep doing this. Like also actually one moment that was really tough was a couple of days before I got my request from my agent, I got a couple of very kind personalized rejections from 2 of my dream agents. And like at that point I was like, I had rewritten this book, the whole book, brought it down to the proper word count. I had tweaked the beginning. I'd done pretty much everything that I could think of that I could do on my own. And at that point I was like, I don't know what else. Like I legitimately don't know what else to do. I've had people read it. I've, you know, so I nearly pulled all my queries. And then I think like something like 3 days later, I got that email from my agent saying like, wow, I absolutely raced through the first 50 pages. Could I have the rest? So like really like you never know what's right around the corner, and you'll never know until you're actually there and see it.
Andy, I love that story. I know that I've like shared my story, so I won't get too into it, but I had gotten like an awful rejection from an agent I was so excited about. And then like I couldn't even write. I had to go take a nap, and an hour later I got my first like request for a call. And so I can just so identify with what you said. You know, you feel so low and like nobody's ever gonna want your book, and then you're like, oh my gosh, somebody likes my book.
Yeah.
Okay.
You never know what could happen. Yeah.
It's so true. It's so true.
What about you, Tobie?
What do you think?
Yeah, I don't want to say I ever felt like quitting, because like Andy said, it's like you know where you started and how far you've come with each book. You know, for me, I've written 5 books. I haven't queried all of them, but I have written them, and with each book I've seen myself progress. And I didn't start writing until 2008 and 2019. Like ever. Like I never had the inclination to write. So when that took root, it took root deep. And like I just felt like it kind of had like woven into the fabric of who I was, and I was like, I can't give up on this because I feel like I'm giving up on myself, because I know the stories are in here for a reason, and I knew the type of stories that I wanted to write and that I was writing were going to speak to heart of the people that were suffering and the things that I was writing about, and would also kind of speak to the people that might have kind of been on the outside of those things, you know, the husbands, wives helping their spouses through suffering, or their kids through mental health and all of that. So I knew it was like kind of, I wasn't just giving up on myself, but I was giving up on the stories that I knew would touch somebody else in a way that it needed to touch somebody. So I think that's why I kind of never had the inclination to be like, you know what, I give up. Like, no, I just was like, not my agent, not my time, not the story, but there's one out there, and I'm going to find that one.
I was always just so impressed with how positive you were able to, at least like your words were always so positive. I don't know how you felt on the inside, but you always just approached it in such a positive way. So I thought that was very cool. Well, I think those are all of our questions. Do either of you have anything else you want to talk about with getting your agent or being on sub or querying, or anything, any other advice you want to offer?
Just like a tip for querying is just shorter the better. Like it's so easy to just go long with your query letter, but like shorter the better, because agents are just glancing through, and it's like they're busy, they have a lot on their plate, so they're really trying to get through it. And it's not like it's it's not their fault, and you know, like they're doing the best they can, but they can sometimes only spare a quick glance, so you want to grab them with your attention, or grab their attention as fast as you can. And I would say 250 words is a sweet spot, which sounds insane, but it's possible. You can do it.
Like I said, all I have to say would just be stay positive. Keep those around you positive. Don't kind of like look to those negative things and crowd around people who might also be focusing on those negative things. I mean, as writers, it's a long process. You know that from the jump that it's going to be a long time. So find people that you want to do the long haul with, that are going to keep you motivated, keep you focused, and keep you encouraged. I think that's the biggest thing, is stay encouraged, because like you said, your story is going to be for somebody.
Yeah, that's great advice. Where can people find you online?
Everywhere. I'm on
How
Twitter.
How can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Tobie Carter 6190. You can find me on TikTok at author Tobie Carter, and then on Instagram at tobiecarter.writer.
And I'm mainly on Instagram at Ande Pliego Writes, and also on Twitter intermittently at Ande Pliego Write, because it wouldn't let me add the S.
And we'll link all that. We'll link all that in the notes below.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. We are so excited to do this panel, and I think that this will be great for our viewers. Everyone tuning in again, this is Moms Writers Club. I'm Jessica, this is Sarah, and we will catch you soon. We have our Wednesday night chats every other Wednesday on Twitter. We have our YouTube channel. We have a Discord now as well. So if you need the link, the invite for that, just send me a DM. And we're doing a lot of sprinting. So if you're interested in doing some writing sprints with us, find us over on Twitter or on Instagram. Anyway, that's it for today. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Great. Thank you, Jessica and Sarah. Thank you all watching.
Thank you both for coming on. This is fantastic.